Hi. I was today years old when I realized I have an eating disorder, or have had an eating disorder. I just want to say I'm not a professional in any form. Anything that I say in this video is from my own experience, my own personal experience, and I'm not at all a professional or a psychologist or anything like that. Also, if any of this triggers you, please do not watch. If eating disorders or talking about eating and restricting and binging or anything like that triggers you, please do not watch this. That was an exaggeration, what I said before. I didn't just realize that I have an eating disorder, but I have always known that I have an unhealthy relationship with food. I just never defined it as an eating disorder or actually acknowledged it as a problem, and that's what I want to talk about today. I've never been a smaller body type, and it is a stereotype that people with eating disorders aren't bigger people, or can't be bigger people, or can't be, that people with eating disorders are usually small, skinny, slimmer people, which is completely false. Obviously there are different types of eating disorders and issues with relationships with food, but I never thought that mine was a serious problem or something that should be actually acknowledged, because I just thought I'm not anorexic, therefore I can't have an eating disorder, which is completely wrong and false. And I really do need a new camera because this one keeps dying. So it's the next day, but anyway, ever since I can remember, I have had issues with interoception, which I think is common for autistic individuals, and I think also in people with ADHD. I'm not sure, I have to do more research on that specifically, which I do plan to do, but essentially it means that we can't recognize signals in our bodies as well as neurotypical people might be able to. So if someone else feels hungry, they'll eat. Or if you're full after a meal, you'll know when you're full and you'll know when to stop eating. We can't do this. A lot of the time, I don't know when I'm full. I don't know when my body is done eating. I don't know. A lot of the time I forget that I'm hungry because I'm so hyperfixated on something else that I'm doing that I will completely forget that I was hungry or thirsty, or my body just won't send me those signals where I can actually recognize them. Obviously, until I got diagnosed recently, I didn't know that this was interoception when I was younger. I always knew that I had problems towards food, and I used to eat way too much sometimes, and then other days I would get to the end of the day and then realize that I haven't eaten anything. And I used to think, oh, but like everyone obviously deals with that. It's not just me. I'm sure this is normal. Like, it happens, we all forget to eat lunch or whatever sometimes. But the difference was I wasn't just forgetting. My body actually wasn't communicating that I was hungry throughout the day or thirsty. So ever since I can remember, I would eat so much to the point where a normal kid would just not eat that much. Like, it was very strange, and I knew it was strange, and I knew that other kids my age were not eating that much, but I genuinely couldn't tell when I had eaten enough and when my body was full. I would just keep eating. And so this is sort of how it started. This is how it manifested. When I was little, I used to get home from school after already eating a massive lunch, and probably breakfast that day, and just eat everything in the cupboard, in the fridge. Like, I would be consuming massive amounts of food, and then I would also have dinner because I just couldn't tell that I had eaten enough for that day, if that makes sense. And I used to do this all the time. I remember we went on a family trip, and on the drive there, I consumed an entire bag of chips, like a big bag of chips, and I was still hungry, or I thought that I was. And then, yeah, when we got there, I ended up eating a whole packet of those salada crackers, whatever they're called, the plain crackers. I just kept eating them because I was enjoying them, and I couldn't tell that I was actually very full, and I didn't eat anymore. There were days where I'd get home from school. It was always usually when I'd get home, because I knew that there was some shame with how much food I was consuming and that this wasn't normal. I just didn't know why I was doing this and why I felt the need to keep eating. So I did recognize that it felt shameful to me. So when I would get home and I could be in my room by myself, I would eat like a whole, one of those like bread tear aparts from the bakery. I would eat like a whole one of those, then still have dinner and dessert that night. And obviously I never recognized this as a problem, because I always thought that eating disorders were only a problem when you weren't eating enough, when you weren't fueling your body, and when you were too small. And because I was never small, because I was binge eating, I didn't recognize it as a problem that I needed to get help for. But that's not actually, I'm realizing that that's not actually a healthy relationship towards food, even though I was still maintaining a healthy weight. Eating that way is not normal, and eating because you're stressed or because you're acting on some sort of emotion instead of eating to enjoy food is actually not a healthy way to look at it. At a certain point, obviously, my body started to change, as it does in puberty. And as they do, my family started commenting, and people around me started commenting on me looking bigger and putting on weight and not being as small as I was when I was obviously a kid. And this really, really struck a nerve, and I think it's because I obviously I knew I had some sort of issue with how much food I was eating, and my relationship with food. So when people started saying this, I started to look at my body differently and actually realize, okay, maybe I do have a problem and maybe I need to actually go on a diet, or I started to pretty much think that I was overweight and that I needed to lose weight pretty much. And this is when my body dysmorphia started. And I started to really be confused with whether I actually was overweight, and, you know, why does my body stick out and other people's don't? Why does my stomach stick out and other people's don't? Why are my thighs bigger than other? I started really comparing myself to every female in my life, even though obviously we all come in different shapes and sizes, and it really comes down to genetics sometimes. But I started, comparing myself to everyone. So this is when the restricting started, which ultimately just led to my binge eating getting worse, because I would go the whole day again without eating as punishment if I had binged the night before, and then I would just end up probably binging that night or the next day, because I would get so hungry because I've just been restricting all day, and just this constant loop and cycle of binging and restricting began. This was probably in my late teens when this started. So I also realized that there was a connection between the emotions that I was feeling and when I would binge eat, obviously, and when I would restrict. But I didn't know how to identify those emotions and how to deal with that myself. Because at this point, I obviously didn't even recognize that I had a problem as well. So I didn't know how to identify when I was having a stressful day and comfort myself and self-soothe without turning to food as my comfort. I know that there is a lot of research as well behind how this links to autism and ADHD, and how interoception and the lack of dopamine that people with ADHD have, and how this links to why we have eating disorders and unhealthy relationships with food. And I know that it is a common occurrence in neurodivergent people. So I think it's important that we talk about it more in order to hopefully understand it more. I'm still doing my research. I'm still starting to understand it as much as possible. So I never actually sought professional help for these issues that I was having with food. I never thought that it was a big enough problem for me to need to talk to a psychologist and figure out what was going on here and why I had such an unnatural connection with food. Only a couple of years ago, really, did I find out that what I was dealing with and what I have been dealing with on and off my whole life is a binge eating disorder. That was only a couple of years ago, and I am 23. So I genuinely had no idea that an eating disorder could look different to bulimia or anorexia. I wasn't aware that my eating disorder was as serious as it has been, and how much it really affects my life. If your Roman Empire is food and how skinny you are each day, that's a problem. When you get into this cycle of binge eating and restricting, and you really go deep down into that rabbit hole, I personally don't think it's possible to get out of it on your own, and I've been trying to get out of it on my own for the last couple of years, when really I should have just been getting help from a professional, because it is serious and it is worth taking seriously, because it affects every aspect of my life. Because all I'm thinking about is food and my weight and how I look. And that's a big deal, and it should be taken seriously. As I start going through another stressful period of time in my life, maybe it's I'm starting a new job, or I'm going through a stressful period at work, or I don't know, I'm in a stressful relationship personally, or I'm going through some stress in my personal life, whatever it is, my relationship with food worsens and it starts all over again, and the binge eating becomes very severe, and it really, really affects my life detrimentally. So it is worth talking about, and it is worth getting help for. And this is something I want to just reiterate, that I am not a professional. So this video is solely my personal experience with eating, and I want to make it very clear that anything that I say in this video is purely my personal experience, and I will be seeking out professional help as soon as possible in order to work on this part of myself. And talking about it, I think, has just been the first step for me in actually acknowledging that it is a problem, and it's a problem that probably shouldn't have been ignored for this long. So yeah, I hope we can all get more comfortable with talking about these things, and how important it is to not feel like you need to suffer alone and in silence, because that's what really just makes things worse, and what makes things go on for longer than they need to, when you really could just reach out to people who are there for you and who can support you and help you get the help that you need to improve. I want to also say that I don't have a formal diagnosis, but I believe that I have IBS, and I've struggled with IBS also since I can remember. So I think this has been something that has developed because of my relationship with food into something really, really horrible. I won't go into further detail on that, but irritable bowel syndrome is not something fun to deal with. It's not fun. So I think that that's also a side effect that has occurred because of my continued issues with eating and binge eating in particular, and also my anxiety and mental health issues that have made it even worse, that have worsened the way that my body functions and reacts to certain emotional distress. So if you're waking up every day and the first thing you're sort of thinking about is, what am I going to eat today? How many calories am I going to consume today? How am I going to make sure that I stick to this really restrict diet? That is not healthy. And it controls everything that you do and how your day goes. And that's not normal. I am guilty of being that person who wakes up and doesn't have breakfast and convinces myself that I'm just gonna have a coffee and that'll fuel me for my day up until a very late lunch or even dinner sometimes, because in my head, if I can go that long without eating, then for some reason that makes me feel better about myself and about my weight. But then obviously I just end up overeating later on and then overanalyzing everything that I eat. And I don't want to live my life that way anymore. I don't think that that should be normalized, and especially at this current time when, for women specifically, being small it's like a trend. It's the new thing that everyone needs to be tiny. Like the tiniest we've ever been, it's coming back that you need to be at an unhealthy weight pretty much and not eat a healthy diet in order to look your best. Like that's considered normal at the moment, from what I can see. This is dangerous. This is dangerous to people like me who were young and impressionable growing up and look at these influential, famous, influencers and people that they look up to parading around this content that you shouldn't be eating a normal amount of food each day. You shouldn't be fueling your body. You should look like them, which is just unhealthy. It's really, really, really dangerous. I also think that it's important that we stop commenting on younger people's bodies, or anybody's bodies for that matter. Whether you think that you're complimenting someone or whatever the reason may be that you feel the need to comment on someone's weight, or whether they look like they've lost a lot of weight or whether they've put on a bit of weight, whatever it is, it's not helpful you have no idea what that person is going through in their life. They might be trying to put on weight, and you commenting on them looking skinny, it wouldn't be helpful. You just have no idea what people are going through behind the scenes. And I know I'm guilty of this. At one point or another, I think I've commented on a friend's weight, and I thought that I was complimenting them or saying something nice. But then I look back on that and I think that was not a good idea, because I have no idea what her personal goals were and whether that was a helpful thing to say to her in that moment. So I think we just stop commenting on people's bodies, especially women, because it's so hard to have a healthy relationship with food at the moment, and without people constantly making negative assumptions towards people's weight.